Hi everyone, welcome to another video. So today we're still looking at Luther at that set episode, season 1, episode 1, but today I'm going to break down the sound that's used within that episode. So before we get started, it's worthwhile noting that there's two different kinds of sound that you need to be aware of when it comes to your GCSE. So the first one is something called diegetic sound. Now that sound is anything that is natural to the scene. So we're not just talking about natural sounds like birds singing or the wind or things that we would expect to find in nature. We're talking about things that are expected within the scene that we're watching. So if we're looking at a street in like a city centre, we would expect to hear noise of people talking, of cars. All that sort of stuff is natural to that scene, so we would class it as diegetic sound. Now, things that are not natural to the scene, things that are added in post-production, are things called non-diegetic sounds. So these are things that are like voiceovers, theme tunes, any sort of background music. All of this is not natural to the scene that we are witnessing, and so this would be non-diegetic sound. So when you break up the Luther episode, you get a sort of split that looks a little bit like this. Within the diegetic section, the sounds that are natural to the scenes that we see, we have things like footsteps, particularly during that opening scene where Madsen is being chased. We've got Madsen's heavy breathing, the falling debris in the sort of medical centre or sort of warehouse. We have the heavy breathing or panting as Luther and Madsen face off against each other. But we also have things like the police sirens. We have the victim taking a sort of deep breath to know that she's alive. We then have things like Madsen falling and hitting the bottom of the sort of the bottom of the, I don't know, warehouse, I guess. We've got the bird song near Alice's house. We've got Luther smashing the door. So all these sorts of things are diegetic or natural sound for the scenes that we see. In the non-diegetic sound, we have a lot of background music used within the episode as a whole. So we've got background music for Madsen, we've got background music for Alice, we've got fast-paced music as the narrative starts to pick up and Luther starts to get into solving the case. And we've obviously got that theme tune, which is a track called Paradise Circus by a band called Massive Attack. Now, these aren't all of the sounds within the show, but they are some of the key ones that I picked out as I was watching it. And alongside watching it, I also found that there were a few sounds that could be considered as both diegetic and non-diegetic. Silence is something that I think could be considered diegetic and non-diegetic. And I know that silence is sort of the absence of sound or isn't sound at all, but it's worthwhile considering when it's made so obvious a focus. Madsen on the phone, when we hear his voice coming through Reed's phone, that's something that could be considered both, and we'll go into that in a minute, as is the silence at Zoe's house. Now, before I carry on by looking at the analysis of this, it's worthwhile mentioning that as I was watching this, I was actually watching it on Netflix. I wasn't watching it on iPlayer at my computer like I had been doing for the case study. And I discovered that if you are watching Luther on Netflix, there are several sections of that episode that are completely cut out. So if you are wanting to do some work on Luther yourself, if you're studying it at school, the best place to watch this, other than getting the DVD, watching it for free, the best place to watch it is on BBC iPlayer, because you will get the full episode. And on Netflix they've cut out several sections, such as Alice in the car sort of smirking on her way home from the police station, such as Luther in the opening where he's in the psychiatric facility. They've cut scenes like that out, so it's worthwhile just sort of checking and making sure that the one you're watching is the full episode. So let's have a look at this and analyse this in more detail then. So why is diegetic sound used? Well, on the one hand, it can make the scene seem more realistic. So if we've got police cars there, we know that this is a crime drama. It's sort of including those recognisable conventions, but it also adds to the realism of the scene and it makes us feel like we're actually there. Diegetic sound can also increase tension and suspense. So the heavy breathing that we've got during the chase with Madsen really ramps up the tension and suspense, because we know that he's not going to have a lot of energy left to keep going all the time. We've also got diegetic sound that adds to setting or representation. So the birds singing outside of Alice's house sets up that she is a character who comes from quite a wealthy background, who lives in the suburbs. So we would expect a little bit from her as a sort of middle to upper class character before we even meet her. We've also got some diegetic sound providing relief. So when we have this drawn out moment of sort of near silence, or at the very least that the sort of non-diegetic music where we're waiting for the victim to take a breath after Teller's been doing the CPR, when she does take a breath, this obviously diegetic sound creates a sense of relief within the audience, because that's what we've been waiting for all that time. We've also got diegetic sound sort of illustrating the narrative. So Madsen's footsteps and Luther's footsteps indicate that the narrative is a chase. We've also got the debris falling down from that walkway, foreshadowing what's going to happen next. So diegetic sound can do an awful lot for a scene. Non-diegetic sound, though, can do just as much. So the music, particularly the music during the chase scene, adds to the tension and suspense of that scene, but also mirrors the pace of the action. And that's seen after Luther realises that Alice is the one who has committed the crime. The music increases in speed and in pace, and that sort of reflects Luther's mind, and also the idea that he's on a time limit to sort of get the case solved. Now, sometimes non-diegetic sound is linked to a character. So whenever we see Alice, or just before we see Alice, we get a particular kind of music which is normally played through things like string instruments, which gives a little bit more of a sinister air, and so it gives us additional levels of meaning to her character and the narrative. We've obviously also got that theme tune playing a massive part in the show as a whole. So theme tunes act as a form of brand identity, because when we hear that music, we link it with that particular product. But they also act as a sort of call to viewers. So if anybody's out of the room or away from the television or whatever they're watching it on, when they hear that theme tune, they know, okay, right, I've got to get my cup of tea or whatever and actually get down and get ready to watch this. Interestingly, the track that the producers have chosen sounds very much like a heartbeat as well, which is perhaps this link to crime drama and links to things like our victims. Now, this might be me going too far down the sort of rabbit hole of Luther, but what I've done is had a look at the Massive Attack track, Paradise Circus, and had a look at some of the lyrics within the track as a whole, to see if we've got any clues as to perhaps why the producers chose this, because this is a deliberate choice that has been made here. Now, interestingly, the track is made up literally of only 2 verses, so we have this repeated sort of 2 or 3 times throughout the song as a whole. And there are a few things in here that could perhaps link to Luther, or might perhaps be one of the reasons why they chose this as the opening theme tune to Luther. So the first thing that I noticed was this idea of a storm. So storm could represent Luther's character, because we know, having seen him attack the door at Zoe's house, that there are multiple parts to his personality, and he isn't necessarily restricted and sort of sensible or orderly. He does things in a way that can be quite erratic. It could also refer to crime as a whole. Now, this second line was quite interesting, because it sort of implies that Luther does a job that normal people turn away from. We have to remember that the things that Luther comes across in his day-to-day life are not things that we would choose to look at ourselves. So he's sort of taking on a role here. References to the devil were quite interesting, because I thought that it could obviously refer to Alice, or it could refer to criminals in general. And then we have this line about liking it when we're spinning in his grip. So again, illustrating Luther's personality. He enjoys solving crimes and edging closer and closer to that moral line. Now, that second verse was quite revealing, and this is the bit you hear in the actual theme tune. Alice and Luther, particularly at the end of this first episode, seem like they're more than friends, which could be, or could indicate that this line is a reference to them. It could also reference Luther's intense emotions towards everything. So we know that he feels an awful lot, and when he feels things, he feels them very strongly. And finally, picking out this idea of her with her eyes like a flame. Again, very clear reference to Alice, who, again, I'm not going to give anything else away, but becomes a feature for the show as a whole, not just for this particular episode. Moving on to both then, those things that I thought could apply as both diegetic and non-diegetic sound. Silence can initially fall under the idea of being diegetic sound because it's natural to the scene. So we would expect some quiet, particularly when we're at, say, Luther and Zoe's house. We would expect it to be fairly quiet. But it's also non-diegetic because we would also expect to hear other things happening at the same time. So we know that Zoe lives on a street, on a road. Why don't we hear anything else? Why don't we hear anything from inside her house? If you guys just sit and take a minute and maybe pause the video and just listen to what's going on around you, you'll know that there are other sounds in a house rather than just silence. So it has been emphasized, and one of the reasons that it's emphasized is to increase this tension, because silence is normally a signal that something is going to happen. And so whenever we get silences within Luther, we know that something is going to happen next, and it's just what this thing is that's going to happen. Now, Madsen on the phone, again, could be considered natural for the scene because we would expect to perhaps hear a little bit of what's happening on the other end of the phone. But it's so clear and it's so emphasised that clearly this has been edited in post-production. And again, that is a reason why then it's non-diegetic. Now, this is done so that there's no doubt in anyone's mind, whether that's the characters or the audience, that what Luther is doing is wrong. And it also shows that other people are aware of his character, which is then obviously going to be important for later episodes. Hopefully that's been useful to you guys. A few more key terms today, so have a look at those, maybe see if you can use them in your explanations. I've deliberately not explained all of the diegetic or non-diegetic sound because what you guys can be doing as part of your revision is you guys can be actually writing up answers, how the diegetic sound is used and why, how the non-diegetic sound is used and why. So have a go at including some of these key terms when you do. As I said over the past few videos, while we are in the situation that we're in, as long as I'm not in school, I will be making videos for you guys as often as I can, hopefully every day, but at least every other day. If you are at home right now, please make sure that you are staying safe, make sure that you're washing your hands, make sure that you are keeping your distance from other people, not going around to friends' houses and following all of the advice that is given by the government. If you guys are in school, make sure that you are staying safe by washing your hands as regularly as possible, and I will see you guys later for another video.